I'll be your host, Christopher Campbell. And today, I'll be your host, Christopher Campbell. And today, we're going to be learning about the first phase of the alchemical process, which is calcination. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you coming to my lesson. And I hope that everyone is enjoying the academy. Now, as we can see, the alchemists of old, we were told that turning lead into gold, that this was a material desire that they had, and that the reason why they did it was to profit from material gain, to learn the great arcanum in order to transmute lead into gold. The truth of the matter is, it was a coded language for an internal spiritual development, as within, so without. So we understand that they took the outer alchemical laboratory work as a metaphor for the work that the soul does with the human body. This calcination process is the first of the 12 processes that take place, and it is ruled by Aries. "12 stages for the 12 Zodiac, Aries being the first. As you can see on the chart to the right, it's going from Aries to Taurus. I'm going down. So we have Aries, calcination, Taurus, congelation, Gemini, fixation, Cancer, dissolution. Notice the water sign, dissolution. Leo, digestion, fire. Virgo, distillation, because remember that the body's actually fed through the gases and nutrition, the gaseous distillations of the digestion. We have Libra, sublimination, Scorpio, separation, Sagittarius, the fire sign, incineration, fermentation, Capricorn, multiplication, Aquarius, and projection, Pisces. So these 12 alchemical transformations are what happen inside of the laboratory when they are looking for the prima materia, or the first cause, or the fifth element, the spirit. And they are attempting to use the laboratory as an outer replica of what is taking place on an internal level. So how do we begin the calcination process consciously? Well, we begin at Aries, March 21st, just as the sine wave goes. We begin to self-actualize and improve ourselves when we want to eliminate bad habits and our egos. We begin to retain our sexual energy and rise it up the spine like a shepherd's staff. And as we start to attempt to purify our minds, our bodies, and our emotions, lots of inner aggregates from the inner subconscious mind begin to rise to the surface. This is exactly what takes place in the alchemical process of calcination if it was applied to a base metal. It would be burned and purified to separate the inferior elements from the pure element. So we use our fiery impulse and retain it. And by doing this, we heat up our internal reservoirs, our canals. And this starts the cooking process, which allows the first part of the alchemical process to begin. So Manly P. Hall said in the Secret Teachings of All Ages that these 12 zodiac are linked with the 12 signs of these 12 are linked with the 12 signs of the zodiac in a matter worthy of consideration. And that quote was next to a picture of the 12 alchemical transformations that occur within us. So Aries rules calcination. Calcination refers to heating a solid chemical compound to high temperatures in absence or limited supply of air or oxygen, generally for the purpose of removing impurities or volatile substances and or to incur thermal decomposition. So you are heating a solid chemical compound to a high temperature, limiting the supply of oxygen and removing impurities. This is exactly what we do when we practice yoga, pranayama, sense control, when we're seated within the self and we're not perturbed by the tattvas, or we're not perturbed by the three gunas. When we stand witness, we can take a look at ourselves and scoop out the impurities. These are the volatile substances. And we limit the supply of air oxygen, which means we actually start controlling our mind. Remember, the air relates to the mind. So when we start to regulate our thoughts and become aware of our thoughts and observe them and begin to meditate and become self-aware, we're beginning this process of Aries calcination. Now, I know Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and we start by purifying our vessel by slowly turning up the heat. The heat is produced from the bottom of the chimney, as we went over in the lectures of Mysteries of Santa Claus. We understand that in the traditions of the Taoist Qigong, in the traditions of the Hindus of Kundalini, and what Christians would term the Holy Spirit, all have to do with the level of chastity and to be able to preserve the sexual energy. This allows the process to begin. This is what actually starts purifying the tomb or the physical body. Calcination also is where we start to abstain from limiting beliefs, bad habits, self-doubt. We begin to look at the matrix and society for what it is and start to go within for answers and look for them without. We start exercising our cerebrum. We begin noticing things about ourselves that are in the way of our true happiness and liberation. So we actually start to become irritated with some of our behaviors or bad habits or routines. We start to self-reflect. We may find out that we were born into a limited culture belief where we believe that our religion is the only true religion just because we were born into that particular culture of religion. We may begin to become more open-minded and see that the Creator has emanated all of these truths and strung them along in all of these different places. So this is where we get our first awakening of self-actualization and begin to actually stop identifying with the body, mind, and senses. So this is the first awakening. You begin to see the truth of the inner being and recognize the outer matrix for what it really is. You begin to start questioning your reality just like Neo did in the Matrix. We've all went through this process of calcination. When you realize that, hey, I'm actually a light being trapped in a body. This is pretty crazy. You start questioning your reality and who you are. So this is when the pineal gland actually gets stimulated. And in the cerebrum, you will feel crackling. And in the Bible, it's called the thunder and lightning, that there will be crackling, thunders, quakes and earthquakes, and thunder and lightning. Now, this is referring to emotional possibly even actual catastrophic events internally or externally. But what it's referring to is the head that's in the heavens, which is our cranium. And when we start waking up and realizing who we truly are, our pineal glands start to crackle. This is when the pineal gland begins to resonate and starts to open ever so slightly. Because once you're on the path of initiation, you start building up a certain internal pressure and heat within the body. And this internal pressure and heat within the body starts vaporizing up the spinal column and activating the pineal gland. So it's very possible to hear the crackling noises of those glands activating. So Aries marks the start of the hero's journey. This is when the great Mother Sophia, or wisdom, initiates us into the mysteries of creation, mysteries of our soul, mysteries of where we came from. She stands there waiting for us to unveil Isis. Isis, the great mother, who allows us to awaken to our inner self divinity, to become Christ child, to understand who we are in a sense of where we come from, sense of purpose, unveiling the truth to us little by little. As we get a glimpse, we're able to take this opportunity and use it as a catapult for our spiritual development. And we can use it to overcome a lot of entropy. But at this time, we begin to meet our inner shadow. And Aries comes from the word arise. Aries, arise. And we arise to meet our inner shadow and start purifying our actions and thoughts. So we take up practices and disciplines. We observe ourselves. We start to stand apart from society. This is done with the power of Mars, the ray of Mars, Samael. Aries is ruled by Mars. And we heat up our swords, our warrior sword, because Aries and Mars represent the hero, the warrior. We heat up our swords and the friction that we create when we start to abstain and not just do exactly what our body wants us to do, or when we start to actually take back our power and take conscious action rather than automatic impulsive behavior. There's an amount of inner friction that takes place. Now, Eliphas Levi says that this inner friction is exactly compared to how much power you'll have to overcome and to become the best person you can. You have to have this inner level of resistance to create the charge, because the human body is like a battery. It's a torus field. And when you're actually using the energies of the lower chakras, they begin to charge the higher chakras through pressure. So this is how we heat up our swords, which is none other than the spinal column. And that's the friction. With the friction that's created, we sharpen it. And we're able to pierce our animal nature and start to transmute it into divine. Essentially, we go to war with the dragon to save the princess. We know that Aries and Scorpio are both ruled by Mars, and I'd like to share with you the intimate connection between Aries and Scorpio. Now, Aries and Scorpio are both ruled by Mars. We know that we have both fire in our brains and fire in the genitalia region where Scorpio rules. Now, the energy as above, so below. This battery that we have transmutes the energy from the lower part of the spinal column into the cerebrum. So they're intimately created. When you're charging your sexual energy, you're charging your brain glands with the fire of Mars. Aries and Scorpio are both ruled by Mars. Mars is the planet of fire. It's the warrior god of the planets. The warrior takes a sword into the underworld of Scorpio and with the fire chisels it into the master sword. The fire in the head must overcome the fire in our groins. The scorpion is always there tempting us. When we fall into temptation, we experience the scorpion sting. We have to learn how to utilize that fire energy and dominate with the fire in our brains. So as we can see, the allegories are more real than fact. Transcendental truths. And these 12 alchemical transformations are deeply connected to the 12 zodiac and the 12 archetypes, as well as the hero's journey. In every myth and heroic tale, there have been these two archetypes. For example, the dragon and the hero with the sword that goes to save the princess from the dragon. It might be in a castle or a dungeon. Now, the sword, it usually vanquishes the darkness, and the hero uses it to overcome the villain, save the princess. So the sword is none other than the spinal column itself, and we as humans are upright and stand vertical. So this allows us to have autonomy over our nervous system and be in control of the animal impulses. So by being conscious of this energy that's generated in Scorpio, which in occult anatomy rules the generative system, you know, the fire rises into the brain. And Manly P. also says in occult anatomy of man that we must ascend this fire up into the cerebrum or the higher brain. So the lower fire gets added onto the higher fire, and the lamp is ignited. This is the key to all of the allegories and heroic tales. And this is also the key to the Hermit card. Next time you look at the tarot, analyze the Hermit card and notice that he rises his lamp up high over his head and that his spine is erect. He represents initiation into the mysteries. And the truth of the matter is, this path can be very lonely. When you're doing the calcination process, your body's heating up, you're overcoming negative habits. A lot of parts of you and negative, or I would say suppressed, or parts of yourself that you were before ignorant of start to come to the surface. So it's normal to experience deep emotions or to even at times cry or to get angry or to have these emotions come to the surface that may not have been coming up before because they were so deeply ingrained within the subconscious mind. So through calcination, when you're really turning lead into gold, you're transforming the lead of the personality into gold of the higher spirit. And by doing this, we complete, the soul's descent into matter and its resurrection into its spiritual ether body, and essentially having a spiritual body. In a physical realm very similar to this, but in a higher dimension. Now, 7 chakras correspond to the 7 metals, lead being the bottom of the spine and gold being the crown. And our bodies are the actual alchemical laboratories that we're working with on a day-to-day basis. And we start the calcination project when we meditate. It is a project. We do the calcination. Our internal alchemical calcination begins when we meditate. Many of you are already there, if not past this level. But it's better to observe and guide this process every year, because every single year, as the sun goes through the sine wave and the ecliptic, our bodies are going through this process on some level or another. It happens on a psychological level, a physical level, and even a societal level. So our outer reality is a reflection of our internal reality. This world is essentially a dense dream, a collective dense dream, an eternal realm. So we say this is a realm and not a place. So what can we do on a day-to-day basis to kickstart and really dive into the calcination project? We can meditate on our defects. A lot of Western yogis or Western magicians recommend creating a book and writing down all of your negative qualities, being very critical of yourself. You can also begin to keep a dream journal, but you have to make sure that you are recording your dreams every single night. As soon as you wake up and remember it, you have to write it down, even if it was vague. And if you don't remember your dreams, write down, I did not remember my dreams. So we have a technique here while you're sleeping. We have a technique by meditating, by writing our defects down, our negative qualities. If we are always late, or if we're always overly angry, or if we feel that we are greedy, or if we are miserable, well, you should write this down. Begin to question yourself. You can use the wisdom of the East and use self-inquiry. Begin to intimately ask yourself, who am I? And begin to feel, who am I? Especially after practicing the techniques that you'll learn in this academy. Ask yourself while you're doing these techniques or after you're doing these techniques, combine them and really ask yourself, who am I? And listen for an inner voice who answers. Is there silence? Is there an answer? What do you feel? What do you see? What do you hear? This practice will develop your essence, and you'll be able to identify with the part of you that's actually not inside of the body. So we need to continually preserve the energy that accumulates in the lower cauldron, so that our chrism and our astral canals are fluctuating and filled with energy. So you need to allow this energy to continually rise. So in the Bible, we have Ephesians. It says, now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended? So essentially, we have to get down and dirty. We have, as souls, we took the Fool card and we deposit ourselves inside of incarnation, material realm. And we picked up one of the influences of the 7 rays, a dominant one. And we self-actualize the 12 internal archetypes and go through the 12 stages of growth, just as in the same way the sun goes through the 12 zodiac on the ecliptic. In the same way the solar heroes go through their internal stories and their spiritual pastimes on the transcendental planes. And we have to work with our material beast body. We have to control our food. We have to eat. We have to have sex. We have to procreate. We have our physical nature. We have all of these things to tend to, but they need to be tended to with wisdom and understanding and intelligence. And we have to descend to work with them by not ignoring them, but by using them and utilizing them correctly. So this is what it means to descend to work with the alchemical laboratory, which is the human body in and of itself. So know that as Aries, of course, 6 a.m., March 21st, start of the ecliptic, the start of the hero's journey. Sun takes the path of the hero's journey, just like the solar heroes, just like our soul, because the sun is the macro soul of our micro soul. So, of course, we take after it, just like we take after our parents. We take after our spiritual parent. That physical sun is only a physical representation of an invisible occurrence. Now, through calcination and activating our inner Aries, we reduce our body identification through meditating and self-reflecting and abiding of the self. We know Aries' motto is I am. I mean, internally, we feel this and know this deeply that we are. We could simply say I am, and we know I am. Thomas H. Burgoyne says, to destroy all illusion, know that all is Brahman, and Brahman is the supreme self, the emanation of the supreme personality, which is the Christic logos, Krishna, Christ, or Christ. It was pronounced Krish, Krish, that sound. Krish, Krish, Krish. That sound emanates from the stillness and produces an intelligent being full of love, wisdom, and understanding, the holy three, the high three, of the top of the tree of the life. We abide in this. Through calcination, we reduce our body identification, and we no longer have to become entangled and suffer every time something happens to us or something negative. We stop our limiting beliefs and our bigotries and our biases. We discover the inner being. In fact, myself and others have felt that during the process of waking up, there is a time where you become very scared that you're inside of a body, and it can be very fearful at times. And this is when the consciousness starts waking up and the pineal gland starts activating. Your soul starts waking up and you start identifying with, what you used to think was your body is now just a vehicle. So there definitely a change takes place. So the hero journey, we know that we start off, call to adventure, we meet a mentor, cross the threshold, trials and failures, growth and new skills, death and rebirth, revelation. Finally, something changes and we reach our atonement, get the gift, we return changed and end. So this is what our inner being calls us to, an adventure into the unknown. This is usually symbolized by a forest or the woods or a long journey. This is none other than the realms of the subconscious and infraconscious realms of consciousness. And this is what we have to purify in order to self-actualize here and now, and to acknowledge who we are, immortal light beings. We descended from the crystalline sea, which is the way past, the material realm of the 7 or the 12. It's beyond. So these characters in the stories that we are passed down, we've heard of Moses. Moses astrotheologically represents Mars and Aries. And he also represents the initiate going through the calcination process. So he's an internal archetype, an internal happening, an altered archetype or an altered ego of ourselves or our souls. And he exists in very many forms in different cultures, and his archetypal being uh, actually exists and comes down from the transcendental realms of ideals. Remember in a couple lessons when we explained how, in our last lesson, how the soul descends from the spiritual unlimited realm into the realm of ideals and forms. Well, these are where the characters come from. These beings, these higher beings. They're not literal history. They're anagogical. Moses astrotheologically, he blew the ram's horn, to signify the age of Aries starting and the end of the age of Taurus. The same story said to stop worshiping the golden calf. So the cerebrum, which is Aries, rules over the cerebellum. Sorry for that mistake there. It's supposed to say the cerebrum rules over the cerebellum. The higher mind. The higher mind's the cerebrum, and it rules over the cerebellum, which is the bull, the Taurus. So when Moses is blowing the ram's horn and telling people to not worship the golden calf, it's symbolizing us rising into the higher mind and taking control over our cerebellum. So not only is it the ages transitioning, but it's also psychological internal states that are changing. So we begin to now end body identification. I would begin to actually feel the sense of we're not the body. And this is where we start to be able to dominate our elements that are usually out of control. We begin to fix them. But in order to do this, we have to raise the serpents on the staff, just like Moses did. And we do this by not getting in the way of our natural internal function that allows us to bloom just like a flower. So we learn to transmute our lower nature by abstaining from gluttony or greed, or to not be oversexed, to transmute it, to not be addicted to any substances, to overcome limiting beliefs and egregores, which are psychological aggregates that can torment you for lifetimes. So we can end suffering when we begin the calcination process and actually begin to understand where our suffering comes from. It starts to boil to the top as we heat up. So Moses, the inner Moses, is our inner spiritual power. And it's an archetype that liberates and frees the consciousness from bondage. Now, the consciousness and the archetypes that are in bondage in the lower parts of the tree of life they're considered to be Egypt. Everything below the kidneys is considered to be Egypt in esoteric theology. So we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about the lower animal chakras, and we're trapped in the lower chakras. This is what it means to be in bondage. This is what the Israelites are in bondage, slaving away for the Pharaoh. I have to know an Israelite esoterically is not someone that lives in that country necessarily. These things are allegories. So an Israelite esoterically is one who inwardly has decided to transmute the lower nature into purity and righteousness. So they start to take conscious action over their everyday habits and choices. They begin to learn about the knowledge of good and evil and know that their actions can either be right or wrong. Have to take responsibility for our actions and look at, how are we affecting ourselves? How are we affecting our family, our friends, our community? We have the ability to hurt people, and that's why this knowledge can save us, because we're already on the road to causing great harm to ourselves. So we got to get out of the Pharaoh's clutches. We got to use the power of Moses, which is our inner spiritual willpower, the fiery power of Aries and Mars, to liberate our soul, which is trapped in the lower chakras. And we know that Moses connects with the I am, and that I am is the burning bush. And the burning bush resides in the brain because the brain is heaved up. Heaven means heaved up, and the brain is on top of the temple, and it represents the small manifestation of the kingdom of heaven, which is in the superior dimensions. Now, Moses represents the human soul, or the inner soul power that can connect with this higher eternal supreme Brahman, Krishna, Vishnu, Christ, Jehovah being, this light, Yahweh. Now, our inner being liberates this Moses character in union, and by working with the higher consciousness, liberates the archetypes trapped in Malkuth, which is the lowest Sephiroth in the tree of life, which represents the physical realm or the physical body. So through the calcination process and activating our inner Moses, our willpower, our spiritual insight, we're able to take back our control over our lower mind, stop worshiping the golden calf of the cerebellum, of reactive thinking and sensual pleasures and gratifications and material longings. And we activate the cerebrum. And it's like the burdens are completely taken off of you. You don't feel those agitations. So in this case, the inner being is represented by Moses, which is similar to the story of Arjuna. Just in the Bhagavad Gita, it represents the human soul who connects with the divinity Krishna, or in this case, it'd be the burning bush, Yahweh, the higher mind, the spiritual God manifesting in the physical realm. And then we have Arjuna or Moses, which are the human soul archetypes that are striving on the path to liberation, the initiate. So I understand that Moses represents the age of Mars, or the ram, and he tells us, hey, got to stop worshiping the bull, which is the material realm, to only pursue sense gratification, greed, lust. So the material imbalance without spirit, essentially. So if we cooperate with this inner archetype, we free ourselves from bondage, and all the energy and all the oil will ascend all the way up to the pineal gland and burst it. And we too can become ram horned, just like in the statue. Moses is depicted with ram horns. Almond's horn. It's a symbol of enlightenment. Someone who's walked the path and transmuted their lower nature into their higher nature. When this happens, right at the right hemisphere of the brain's axis, and you have unlimited access to creativity, and you can astral project on command, and you can speak to internal divinities and astral divinities, and be in communication with the seven angelic rays. The society that we live in has completely numbed ourselves and completely eradicated this knowledge from humanity. And we think that it's normal that we're just lucky that we get to sometimes remember a dream, or sometimes lucid dream, or some of us have lost the ability to. So essentially, we have to work very hard, just like Moses did in the story of Moses, to liberate our lower archetypes into the higher mind and actually change. So these stories are referring to seasonal astrotheological, astronomical changes and inner psychological archetypal happenings. And a lot of the times they happen in alignment. So I always recommend when, March 21st comes along, Aries, I'm always preparing to focus on this process of calcination and try to meditate on these correspondences and eliminate bad habits, and just try to free myself from addictions and all different things that you can do each year to help you So, a couple things to walk away from today are these stories contain allegories of inner archetypes. Each character represents a different aspect of consciousness. The aspects of consciousness are eternal and prematerial, so they don't necessarily have to exist in history. The book itself is a manifestation of light. These stories are interpreted from the higher realms of ideals and trickle down from seers and sages and Brahmins, prophets and shamans who have been able to coin and write down what is invisible and unthinkable and bring it down into material fruit. So we go through the journey of the characters very intimately, and we're working with the calcination process of Aries. This is where we ignite and bring mass attention to our inner self of I am. Aries' motto is I am. From this point, we end automated behaviors and begin to live consciously. We begin to read stories like not only the ancient scriptures, but just all the stories that we grew up with. Any superhero story that you've ever read or heard, they contain these contemplated revelations. And if you read them Kabbalistically and mystically, you can achieve epiphanies and see that everything is deeply connected. So the next lesson, we'll be going over the next stage of the alchemical process, which is congulation, which is ruled by Taurus. Now, with the calcination process, it takes a long time. So it's good to digest the information, and we will talk about the next stage of the process in this particular series at a later time. So let's all take some time to meditate on the self, to become aware of our inner I am, and to triumph, to liberate the Israelites from bondage of the Pharaoh in Egypt, so that we can rise to the higher mind and activate the right hemisphere of the brain. Essentially, we can live happily. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this lesson. Please leave me any questions or comments. We're more than happy to help you understand or walk you through any tips to start this process within yourself. Thank you so much for coming to this lesson, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.